Welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. Sleepcast is created to help you relax, slow down, and gently drift off to sleep. There's nothing you need to remember and nowhere else you need to be. Simply get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow tonight's quiet story to carry you away. And now, we hand things over to our two hosts for today's episode. Rest well and enjoy.
I want you to picture the modern National Football League. Like, you know exactly what it looks like today, right? Just close your eyes and visualize a Sunday broadcast in 2026.
Oh, yeah. It is, it's really the absolute apex of modern sports commercialization. I mean,
What?
every blade of artificial turf is sponsored.
Exactly. You have these massive multi-billion-dollar television deals ensuring that every conceivable angle of the field is covered by 4K skycams.
And, every millimeter of player movement is tracked by microchips. It's incredibly precise.
Right, and you have these high-tech instant replay command centers in New York where technicians are scrutinizing like blade of grass level details.
Yeah, they're seamlessly communicating with the officials on the field through these encrypted earpieces.
It's wild, and you have these highly specialized athletes operating under a team salary cap that is now, get this, eclipsing $300 million.
It's a completely sanitized, highly regulated corporate juggernaut.
It really is. So I want you to hold that shiny high-tech image in your head. Got it. Now I want you to completely shatter it.
Yeah, just throw it right out the window.
Exactly, because I want you to imagine that exact same sport being played by exhausted railroad workers and factory men in some local mud-soaked baseball park.
And picture these guys actively hiding their meager, under-the-table salaries from the public because they are just terrified of being exposed.
Right. Picture them playing with this wildly lopsided ball that only looks that way because, well, the players were quite literally too out of breath to inflate it all the way.
Yeah, no skycams there, no encrypted earpieces, just freezing mud and this desperate scramble for survival.
The contrast is honestly jarring. You are looking at two entirely different universes, and they're separated by just a little over a century of absolute chaos.
And bridging that massive gap is basically our mission today.
Yes, it is, because this is a deep dive into the chaotic, dangerous, and surprisingly accidental origins of professional American football.
We're tracing the narrative through line from the sport's unregulated, almost gladiatorial roots, all the way up to the highly structured monopoly it is today.
Right. Our goal is to uncover the fascinating rules, the tools, and the trailblazers that literally saved this sport from extinction.
And to map out that journey for you, we are pulling from a massive stack of historical sources. I mean, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. What exactly are we looking at today?
And we are looking at the historical archives of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We're diving into some retrospective features from Smithsonian Magazine.
Always great stuff in there.
Yeah, and examining historical accounts from History.com, plus dissecting the official NFL football operations records.
So treat this as a time travel journey. We are going back to an era where the game we know and love was just this violent, fragmented mess, trying to figure out what it even wanted to be.
Because to truly understand how we arrived at a $300 million salary cap era, we have to unpack the socioeconomic and cultural forces that forced the game to evolve.
Right, because the NFL didn't just start with some grand master plan cooked up in a boardroom somewhere.
Oh, not at all. He was born out of desperate necessity, regulatory loopholes, and, frankly, a shocking number of happy accidents.
Well, let's start at the absolute beginning. Our sources point to November 6th, 1869, Rutgers versus Princeton.
The famous first game.
Right, but if I bought a ticket and sat in the stands that day, I'm assuming I wouldn't be watching anything resembling a modern spread offense, Rel.
Oh, you wouldn't even recognize it as football. I mean, that 1869 game is widely billed in the history books as the first college football game, but structurally, it was a bizarre hybrid of soccer and rugby.
Like, how so? What were the rules?
Well, they were operating under modified London Football Association rules. So first of all, there were 25 men on each side.
Wait, 25? On the field at once?
Yeah, 50 guys just swarming the ball. And you couldn't pick up the ball and run with it. That was strictly forbidden.
So it was just soccer then?
Mostly, yeah. You batted it with your hands or you kicked it.
Yeah.
It actually took decades of this slow, agonizing evolution to change that.
And a lot of that evolution was driven by guys like Yale's Walter Camp in the 1880s, right?
Exactly. Camp was the pioneer who introduced the specific rule changes that stripped away the soccer elements and transformed rugby into the distinct game of American football.
So he's the one who introduced the line of scrimmage.
Right, the line of scrimmage and the system of downs. Those were Walter Camp's innovations.
Okay, so as those rules start taking shape in the 1880s, the game starts gaining traction, especially in the industrial hubs of the Northeast and Midwest.
Yeah, these athletic clubs are popping up everywhere following the Civil War.
Right, and these local athletic clubs become fiercely competitive. I mean, they all want the absolute best football teams to represent their cities and their factories.
But there's a massive structural roadblock sitting right in their way.
Right, because according to the rules of the day, every single one of these players was strictly supposed to be an amateur.
Yes. The Amateur Athletic Union, or the AAU, held an absolute iron grip over the sporting landscape during this era.
And their fundamental philosophy was that true sport had to be played for the love of the game, right? Not for financial gain.
Exactly. Paying a player was seen as a profound moral failing by the AAU. They had very strict, uncompromising rules against compensating athletes.
But I mean, human nature and civic pride being what they are, the desire to win was simply too strong for these towns.
Oh, way too strong. So an entire underground economy rapidly developed.
Yeah, these athletic clubs were doing whatever they could to secure top talent from rival towns without leaving a paper trail.
And the sources from the Pro Football Hall of Fame detail the loopholes they found. And some of them are just incredibly creative.
Oh, they are amazing. Like, one trick was the clubs would quote-unquote award expensive trophies or pocket watches to their star players after a good game.
Right. And then the player would just walk down the street, pawn the watch for cold, hard cash.
And somehow, miraculously, the athletic club's management would buy that exact same watch back from the pawn shop.
Just in time to give it to the exact same player after the next game. It's brilliant.
It really is. Or they would use the double expense money trick, right?
Yeah. Paying a guy twice for his train ticket and his hotel room, which effectively gave him a salary disguised as a reimbursement.
It was basically the definition of an open secret. I mean, the fans knew it, the opposing teams knew it, the press suspected it, but no one could definitively prove it.
But wait, I'm stuck on something here. Let me ask you this.
Sure, go ahead.
If everyone knew what was happening, and both sides were actively cheating and hiring ringers from out of town, why did they go to such incredible lengths to hide it?
You mean like the elaborate theater with the pawn shops?
Yeah. Why the fake accounting? Who are they actually terrified of?
Well, they were terrified of the AAU's absolute authority. You really have to remember what these athletic clubs actually were.
Right. They weren't just football franchises.
Exactly. There were these massive social and athletic institutions that fielded teams in track and field, rowing, baseball, fencing, boxing, you name it.
Oh, I see. So football was just one arm of a much larger organism.
Precisely. If a club was caught paying a football player and lost its amateur standing with the AAU, the entire club lost its ability to compete in any sanctioned sporting event.
Wow. So the rowers and the track athletes would be punished too.
Yep. They would be ostracized from the entire competitive sporting world. They simply couldn't risk the entire club's existence over one football ringer.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The football team is just a piece of the puzzle, so you have to keep the books cooking to protect everybody else.
Right. And this underground tension sets the stage for what the Hall of Fame considers the breakthrough date in professional football history, November 12th, 1892.
Ah, yes. The big game. You have two fierce, bitter rivals in Pennsylvania, the Allegheny Athletic Association, the AAA, and the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, the PAC.
The rivalry between the AAA and the PAC in the early 1890s was just intense. It was heavily funded and deeply personal.
And leading up to this specific game in November, the PAC found themselves in a desperate situation.
Right, their star player had just gone down with an injury.
So, to avoid losing to their bitter rivals, they decided to completely ignore the unwritten rules of amateurism.
What did they do?
They reached out to the Chicago Athletic Association and offered two of their star players $250 each to come to Pittsburgh and play as ringers.
$250. In 1892, That was a staggering amount of money for a single afternoon of work.
Oh, it was a fortune. And one of those players they approached was William Pudge Heffelfinger.
Pudge Heffelfinger, what a great name.
He had been a 3-time All-America guard at Yale. He was an absolute physical specimen for the era.
But at the time, he was just working a low-salaried railroad office job in Omaha, right?
Right. So the PC slides this $250 offer across the table. But Pudge basically becomes the sport's very first contract holdout.
Really? He turned it down?
Yeah. He looks at them and says he isn't risking his pristine amateur status for a mere $250.
Wow. But the PC's plan leaked, didn't it?
It did. The AAA, the rival club, catches wind that Pittsburgh is trying to buy Pudge Heffelfinger.
So the AAA management decides to launch a preemptive strike.
Exactly. They approach Pudge and offer to double the price. They offer him $500 in cash.
And for $500, Pudge Heffelfinger finally agreed that risking his amateur status was worth it.
Yep. He boarded a train and suited up for the AAA against the P-TAC.
The atmosphere at this game must have been absolute bedlam. I mean, the Pipe realizes the guy they just tried to buy is now lined up right across from them.
Oh, it was chaos. The game actually had to be shortened because the two sides spent so much time bickering before kickoff over the AAA using ringers from Chicago.
They were literally racing against the autumn darkness to get this game in.
But when the ball was finally snapped, Pudge completely dominated. I mean, he forced a fumble, scooped up the loose ball, and ran 25 yards for a touchdown.
Which, just as a quick historical note, back then, a touchdown was only worth 4 points.
Right. And the AAA won the game 4-0, entirely because of the guy they secretly bought.
That is amazing. And immediately after the final whistle, the PAC accused the AAA of paying Pudge, didn't they?
Oh, they were screaming about it. And the fans were furious, primarily because all the local betting pools were completely thrown off by the sudden appearance of this Yale superstar.
So how did the AAA get out of it?
Well, the AAA manager, a man named O.D. Thompson, vehemently denied paying cash. His defense was essentially, I didn't pay him, but even if I did, I just did what Pittsburgh tried to do. I was just more successful at it.
That is quite the legal defense.
Right. And because of the fear of the AAU, the AAA kept their mouths shut. So for almost 80 years, Pudge Heffelfinger being the first paid professional was just an unconfirmed rumor.
Until the researchers at the Pro Football Hall of Fame unearthed an absolute historical treasure.
Yes. They found an actual surviving expense accounting sheet from the Allegheny Athletic Association for that exact game on November 12th, 1892.
And there it is, written in plain ink, signed by that same manager, O.D. Thompson. A line item detailing a game performance bonus to W. Heffelfinger for $500 cash.
It's incredible. The Hall of Fame rightly refers to this specific document as Pro Football's birth certificate.
Because it is the first irrefutable physical proof of a professional football player.
Exactly. It proves the transition from amateurism to professionalism happened much earlier than initially thought.
Right, because for decades, early historians believed a 16-year-old quarterback named John Brallier was the first professional.
Yeah, in 1895, Brallier accepted $10 in cakes, which was slang for having his meals and expenses covered to play for a team in Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
$10 in cakes. I just love the visual of a 16-year-old kid negotiating for pastries so he can go get hit by grown men in a mud pit.
It is a fantastic detail, but the Pudge Heffelfinger ledger predates Brallier's deal by 3 full years.
It's fascinating, and looking at this era of secret professionals also highlights the early, complex integration of the game, doesn't it?
It does. African-American pioneers were operating in this same underground, semi-pro economy long before the modern leagues ever formed.
Right. The Hall of Fame specifically highlights Charles W. Follis.
Yes. Follis was a phenomenal halfback playing for the Shelby Athletic Club in Ohio. The first hard documented evidence of Follis playing for pay dates back to 1904, though historians note he may have been operating as a professional as early as 1902.
So the infrastructure of the game at this point is just fascinating. You have all these local athletic clubs essentially acting as proxy factory teams, secretly moving money around, hiring ringers off trains, and battling for local supremacy.
It feels very familiar, doesn't it?
It really does. It's essentially the exact same mechanism as modern college sports booster clubs passing envelopes of cash under the table to recruits before the modern name, image, and likeness era made it legal. The incentives were the exact same.
The incentives were identical, absolutely. But the consequences of the on-field product were becoming vastly different.
Right, because hiding the money was a relatively simple accounting trick. But as the 1890s bled into the early 1900s, hiding the physical toll of the game was becoming utterly impossible.
Football was exploding in cultural popularity. Tens of thousands of fans were packing into these rickety wooden stadiums to watch these games.
But simultaneously, the sport was mutating into a literal public health crisis.
And lethal is not an exaggeration here. The sources describe the game during this era as an absolute bloodbath.
So walk me through the mechanics of what a football game actually looked like in 1904. Because they aren't wearing the carbon fiber helmets, the reinforced shoulder pads, or the shock-absorbing cleats we see today.
No, visually it would look like a riot. I mean, the players were largely helmetless.
At best, they were wearing those flimsy leather caps, right?
Yeah, caps that offered zero structural protection against a direct impact. But the real danger wasn't just the lack of equipment, it was the rules of the game itself.
How?
The rules actively encouraged using the human body as a battering ram. Offenses relied almost entirely on mass formations and the infamous flying wedge.
Oh, the flying wedge. Explain the physics of that. Why was it so uniquely deadly?
Okay, picture the offensive team forming a literal V shape, like a flock of geese. The ball carrier is tucked safely inside the pocket at the very back of the V.
Okay, I can picture that.
Now, the players forming the walls of the wedge would physically interlock their arms or grab onto each other's leather belts.
So they're physically connected to each other.
Right, and before the ball was even snapped, this entire mass of humanity would start sprinting forward, building up tremendous momentum.
Well, the defense is just standing there waiting for the snap.
Exactly. When the ball was snapped, this interlocking wall of bone and muscle would violently crash into the defensive line, usually targeting one specific defensive player.
That is terrifying.
Because the defense was standing still, the physics were just devastating. It resulted in these massive gang tackles where a single player would be buried under a 1.5 tons of tangled, thrashing humanity.
So you are intentionally engineering a high-speed multi-car pileup on every single play.
Pretty much.
Sure.
And the statistics from the History.com sources are deeply unsettling. In 1904 alone, there were 18 recorded deaths and 159 serious life-altering injuries, mostly among prep school and college players.
Wow, 18 deaths.
Yeah. Obituaries of young athletic men were running weekly in the local papers. And then the crisis peaked the very next year.
1905. The Chicago Tribune actually refers to it as the death harvest.
Yes, the 1905 season saw 19 player deaths and 137 serious injuries.
To put a human face on those statistics, the sources highlight the tragic case of Union College halfback Harold Moore.
Right. During a game against New York University, Moore tried to tackle runner, was kicked in the head in the ensuing pileup, and died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
And this wasn't an isolated incident, was it?
Not at all. It was the grim, expected reality of the era's mechanics.
So the public outcry had to be deafening.
It was. Newspapers across the country were running editorials calling it gladiatorial combat.
And didn't the president of Harvard get involved?
He did. Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard University, launched a massive, highly publicized campaign to abolish the sport entirely.
Abolish it completely.
Yes, he went on record stating that football was more brutalizing than prize fighting, cockfighting, or bullfighting.
And his voice carried immense weight, obviously. I mean, if Harvard decided to pull the plug and drop football, the sport likely would have died out entirely.
Absolutely. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton were the premier economic and cultural engines of the sport at that time. If those three institutions folded their programs, the game would lose all its legitimacy and wither away.
And that existential threat is exactly what prompted the intervention of the ultimate football fan, President Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, TR loved the game.
Of course he did. It perfectly aligns with his entire brand.
He was a die-hard fanatic. You know, Roosevelt believed deeply in a philosophy he called the strenuous life.
Right. He had been the police commissioner in New York, and he famously led the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War.
And he made a point to note that many of his best soldiers were former football standouts. To Roosevelt, the violence of the football field was a necessary proving ground for the battlefield.
He believed it built character. He once wrote, "In life, as in a football game, the principle to follow is hit the line hard, don't foul on and don't shirk, but hit the line hard."
But even a president who championed the strenuous life couldn't ignore the rising body count.
The political pressure was immense, especially since his own son, Theodore Jr., was playing for the Harvard freshman team and getting absolutely battered.
Yeah, during that deadly 1905 season, TR's son had his nose broken, and according to some historical reports, it was broken deliberately by the opposing team.
So Roosevelt knew the game needed to be reformed to survive, but he walked a very fine line, right?
He did. He explicitly stated that he didn't want the game to be played on a too ladylike basis.
He didn't want to emasculate the physical nature of the sport.
Right. He just needed to engineer a way to minimize the fatalities. So abolitionists like Charles Eliot couldn't ban it outright.
So Roosevelt utilized the power of the bully pulpit. Fresh off negotiating an end to the Russo-Japanese War, he pivots his attention to college sports.
Naturally. On October 9th, 1905, he summons the head coaches and athletic representatives from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton to the White House.
And he basically looks them in the eye and demands they clean up the mechanics of the game.
He didn't give them a choice.
Yeah.
And that specific White House meeting directly leads to the formation of an intercollegiate rules committee, which would eventually become the NCAA, and they implemented radical, sweeping rule changes for the 1906 season.
These 1906 rule changes are the bedrock of the modern game. Let's break down the mechanics of how these rules actually saved lives.
Okay, sure.
First, they created the neutral zone. How did that help?
Well, before 1906, the offensive and defensive lines were allowed to line up nose to nose, literally physically touching each other before the snap.
Which sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. It led to massive unseen brawls, punching and gouging at the bottom of the pile before the play even started.
So by instituting a neutral zone, basically the length of the football separating the two lines, it forced a reset and stopped the pre-snap hand-to-hand combat.
Exactly. It gave them space.
Okay, second, they doubled the first down distance. Previously, you only had to gain 5 yards and 3 downs. They changed it to 10 yards.
This was a brilliant mechanical fix.
Why is that?
Well, when you only need 5 yards, a team can just use the flying wedge to grind out 1.5 yards on every play in a giant crushing pile. It works.
But by forcing teams to gain 10 yards, it made the grinding mass formation strategy mathematically inefficient.
Right. It forced teams to actually try and gain larger chunks of ground, pushing the action into the open field.
And that leads to the third and most famous 1906 rule change, the legalization of the forward pass.
The big one.
Now, I think most casual fans assume the forward pass was invented by some offensive genius who realized throwing a spiral was a beautiful way to score points.
That's the myth, yeah.
But the sources make it very clear that isn't true at all.
Not even a little bit. The forward pass was explicitly legalized as an occupational safety measure.
That is just wild.
Think about it. By allowing the offensive team to throw the ball forward, the defense could no longer afford to pack all 11 men tightly into the center of the field to stop the wedge.
Right, they had to back up. They had to spread out to cover the eligible receivers.
Exactly. The forward pass was engineered to dilute the density of bodies colliding at the line of scrimmage. It effectively abolished the mass gang tackles that were killing young men.
That is staggering to think about. Let me synthesize this for you. The forward pass, which is arguably the most exciting, dynamic play in all of modern sports, the exact mechanism that makes a modern quarterback a $50 million a year superstar, was essentially a government-mandated workplace safety regulation.
That is exactly what it was. It was a spatial engineering solution designed to save lives by spreading the players across the geometry of the field.
So the core offensive weapon of the NFL was born out of a desperate attempt to stop a public health crisis.
Yep.
But if I'm understanding the timeline and the mechanics here, legalizing the forward pass in 1906 created an entirely new, massive logistical hurdle.
Oh, a huge one.
Because you can write a rule that says passing is legal, but actually throwing the physical ball they used in 1906 must have been a complete nightmare.
It was physically nearly impossible because of the shape of the ball itself.
Which brings us to the fascinating, highly accidental engineering history of the football.
Right. And to understand how the ball evolved, we first have to clear up a major enduring myth.
Let's hear it.
We constantly refer to the football as a pigskin. But according to the Smithsonian Archives, the ball is not, and generally has never been, made of pigskin.
Wait, really? It's not a pigskin?
No, the tough outer shell is made of cowhide.
So where does the term pigskin even come from then?
Well, in the very early days of the sport, before rubber manufacturing was perfected, the inner bladder of the ball, the part that actually held the compressed air, was likely an inflated pig's bladder.
Oh, wow, okay.
The cowhide was just a protective casing stitched around it. But the nickname stuck. even long after they switched to rubber and synthetic urethane bladders.
Okay, myth busted. It's cowhide. But the shape of the ball is what is truly wild to me.
It's an incredible story.
Because today, we have this perfect aerodynamic prolate spheroid. Quarterbacks can calculate launch angles and spin rates to cut through the wind in a tight spiral.
Right, it's a piece of precision equipment.
But early games, going back to that 1869 Rutgers-Princeton match, used a completely round soccer-like sphere. It was roughly the size of a watermelon.
Imagine trying to throw a watermelon 40 yards downfield.
Exactly. How on earth did we get from a round sphere to the pointed modern football?
Well, the evolution of the football's shape was not driven by high-tech aerodynamic engineers sitting in a lab.
No.
No. It was driven by pure human laziness and exhaustion.
I love this part. The Smithsonian sources provide a hilarious and incredibly revealing historical account from a man named Henry Duffield.
Right. Duffield was a spectator who witnessed that original 1869 game.
And he noted that the ball they were using was indeed supposed to be completely round, but inflating it properly was an exhausting manual chore.
Yeah, they didn't have electric air pumps on the sidelines back then.
I have Duffield's exact quote here, and it is just incredible. He says, "The game was stopped several times that day while the teams called for a little key from the sidelines. They used it to unlock the small nozzle, which was tucked into the ball, and then took turns blowing it up."
This is such a funny visual.
Just imagine these guys freezing in the November air, passing around a tiny metal key, taking turns blowing hot air from their lungs into a heavy letter sphere.
And then comes the best part of his account.
Here's the kicker from Duffield. The last man generally got tired, and they put it back in play somewhat lopsided.
And that lopsided ball is the genesis of the modern shape.
That is just crazy.
I know. The iconic silhouette of the American football began simply because the men tasked with blowing it up on the sidelines got winded, felt dizzy, and just gave up halfway through the job.
They just threw a semi-deflated, warped sphere back onto the field.
And over the subsequent decades, as the game began to merge elements of kicking with the new strategy of carrying the ball tucked securely under a player's arm, the leather naturally stretched and elongated.
Think about the multi-billion-dollar precision of the NFL today. We have entire analytics departments measuring the exact RPMs of a quarterback's spiral. It is like finding out the engine of a modern Formula One car was originally shaped that way just because a mechanic in 1905 got too tired to tighten a bolt. It is the ultimate happy accident.
It really is a perfect historical example of form following function. Because once the forward pass was legalized as a safety measure in 1906, players quickly realized something.
What's that?
That a slightly elongated, lopsided ball was much easier to grip with one hand and hurl downfield than a perfectly round one.
Makes total sense.
But it wasn't until the 1930s, as the forward pass truly became a dominant, game-winning offensive strategy, that the Rules Committee purposely redesigned the specifications of the ball to be longer, slimmer, and more pointed at the ends.
And that purposeful 1930s design has essentially held steady to this day.
Pretty much.
Because the NFL operations sources detail how incredibly precise the manufacturing process is now. If you want an official NFL football in 2026, it has to meet insane microscopic requirements.
Oh, the specs are incredibly tight.
It requires a specialized urethane bladder. It must be inflated to exactly 12.5 to 13.5 pounds per square inch.
Right.
It requires a pebble-grained tan cowhide outer shell to maximize grip. It has to be exactly 11 to 11.25 inches long. And perhaps the most surprising detail, in an era of complete automation, every single official NFL football is still handmade.
Yeah, that is one of the great traditions of the sport. Since 1955, every single official NFL football has been manufactured at a specific Wilson Sporting Goods factory located in Ada, Ohio.
Wow, just one factory.
Just one. It's a small facility with roughly 130 employees, and through a highly choreographed process of cutting, stamping, sewing, and lacing, they hand make up to 4,000 footballs a single day.
4,000 a day, by hand?
Yep. They source heavy cowhides from the Midwest, treat them with a proprietary top-secret tanning recipe designed to optimize performance in freezing weather, and cut them into 4 specific panels.
That's a lot of leather.
It takes one entire cowhide to yield enough leather to make about 10 footballs.
And we have to mention the ball's official moniker. The official NFL football is nicknamed the Duke.
Ah, yes, the Duke.
It was named in 1941 after Wellington Mara, the legendary transformative owner of the New York Giants. His father, the original owner, Tim Mara, named him Wellington after the Duke of Wellington.
Right, and the nickname the Duke was stamped on the balls until the 1969 league merger. It went away for a few decades and was proudly brought back in 2006 to honor Mara after his passing. It is a really fitting tribute to one of the architects of the league.
It really is. So if we pull back and look at the timeline here, by the second decade of the 1900s, the pieces are finally falling into place.
Yeah, you can see the modern game starting to emerge.
You have a sport that has implemented critical spatial rules to keep its players alive. You have a ball that has evolved a shape that allows it to be thrown accurately to execute those rules.
Right, the physical on-field product is finally becoming viable and, actually entertaining.
But structurally and financially, the sport of professional football was still a completely fractured, unsustainable mess, right?
Oh, it's an absolute Wild West. You had these scattered independent factory teams operating across the industrial Midwest.
And they were playing by slightly different variations of the rules from town to town.
Yep. They were ruthlessly poaching players from each other mid-season. They were bankrupting their own local ownership groups, just trying to win meaningless local city championships.
So if this sport was going to survive the economic realities of the 1920s, it needed central organization. It needed to form a monopoly.
Which brings us to the Roaring '20s and the official birth of the league.
The pivotal meetings took place on August 20th and September 17th, 1920.
Right. Representatives from various regional teams traveled to Canton, Ohio.
And they didn't hold the summit in a luxurious wood-paneled boardroom, did they?
Oh, no, not at all. They met inside a working Jordan and Hupmobile automobile showroom.
I just want you to really visualize this scene. You have the men who are hashing out the foundation of what will become a multi-billion-dollar global entertainment industry,
Sitting on the steel running boards of early 1920s automobiles.
drinking beer and sweating in a room that smells like motor oil and exhaust.
It's perfect. And in that showroom, they formed the American Professional Football Association, the APFA, which they would subsequently rename the National Football League in 1922.
And to give this shaky upstart league some instant credibility with the national press, who do they elect as their first president? Jim Thorpe.
Jim Thorpe. I mean, he was arguably the most famous and respected athlete in the entire world at that time.
Yeah, he was an Olympic gold medalist, a former professional baseball player, and a dominant football star for the Canton Bulldogs.
Having Jim Thorpe's name attached to the APFA gave it immediate, desperate national appeal.
But if you read the actual meeting minutes from that showroom, the structural goals of the league weren't exactly glamorous. They were purely pragmatic survival mechanisms.
Right. They weren't talking about growing the game. They were talking about stopping the bleeding.
The minutes state their primary goals clearly. Combat the ridiculously high salary demands from players pitting towns against each other.
Stop players from jumping from team to team for higher bids in the middle of the week.
Which, as we know, was happening constantly. And protect the sport's relationship with the colleges by stopping collegiate players from moonlighting under fake names on Sundays.
They even set a franchise entry fee of $100 to make the league seem exclusive and respectable.
Though, according to the historians, apparently not a single team ever actually paid the $100.
Nobody had the money. It was an incredibly fragile, precarious start.
The league launched with 14 original towns, and those early years were defined by true grit and instability.
The very first game, featuring 2 official league teams, was played on October 3rd, 1920, between the Dayton Triangles and the Columbus Panhandles.
Dayton won that game 14-0, by the way.
You also had fascinating franchises like the Hammond Pros, who are remembered for being one of the most inclusive and progressive teams of the era.
Right. At one point, the Hammond Pros featured 5 of the 10 African-American players in the entire league.
But the lore of these early seasons is just wonderfully bizarre. There was zero infrastructure.
Okay, tell the story of the trophy.
Oh, this is great. So, the Akron Pros win the 1920 APFA championship by finishing with an undefeated record.
Right.
As a reward, they are awarded the Brunswick-Balke Colander Cup.
Okay, sounds impressive.
Yeah, except it promptly vanished from the face of the earth.
Just gone.
Gone.
Right.
The NFL to this day has no idea where its very first championship trophy is. It was never mentioned in the league minutes ever again.
It is highly likely that the first NFL trophy is currently sitting in a cardboard box in someone's attic in Ohio right now.
I wouldn't doubt it. That missing trophy perfectly captures the absolute chaos of the time.
Because franchises were popping up, playing 3 games, running out of money, and folding within weeks.
Exactly. And the story of the Chicago Tigers is a prime example of these insane stakes.
The Tigers were an original 1920 franchise. They played their home games at Cubs Park, which we now know as Wrigley Field.
Right, and they had a fierce, bitter local rivalry with the other Chicago team, the Racine Cardinals.
Which, quick geographical side note here, the Racine Cardinals played their games on Racine Avenue in Chicago, but the guy taking the league meeting minutes in Canton got confused and officially recorded them as being from Racine, Wisconsin.
Just another happy accident. But back to the Tigers and the Cardinals. Here is where the stakes get wild.
Right. The owners of the two teams allegedly made a gentleman's bet on their head-to-head matchup.
The terms of the bet were simple. The loser had to permanently fold their team so the winner could have an uncontested monopoly on the lucrative Chicago market.
That is insane. So what happened?
The Cardinals won the game 6-3. And true to their word, the Chicago Tigers literally disbanded and ceased to exist at the end of their first season.
The finality of that is stunning. One bad afternoon on the field and your entire organization is dissolved.
It's brutal.
Let's try to map that onto the modern era so you can truly appreciate the absurdity. Can you imagine if the Jets and the Giants were struggling in the New York market, so the owners make a bet?
A winner-takes-all bet.
Right. They play this Sunday at MetLife Stadium. The game ends. The loser walks up to the commissioner, logs into the NFL portal, hits delete franchise, and fires all the players and coaches on the spot.
It is unfathomable today, but it highlights just how fragile the early league was.
So what happened to the Cardinals?
The Cardinals survived that bet, eventually moved to St. Louis, and are now the Arizona Cardinals. They actually hold the distinction of being the oldest continuously operating franchise in professional football, tracing their roots all the way back to 1898 as the Morgan Athletic Club.
And the Decatur Staleys, who eventually moved to Chicago and became the legendary Chicago Bears under George Halas, are the only other original 1920 franchise still operating today.
Right. But survival was far from guaranteed, even for the legacy teams.
Because even by 1925, half a decade into the league's existence, the APFA was struggling to draw consistent crowds.
The New York Giants were actively bankrupting their original owners.
So what actually saved the league in those early days?
It was a desperate reliance on star power. Red Grange, who was the most famous college football player in the country, Illinois, signs with the Chicago Bears in 1925.
And George Halas, realizing he has lightning in a bottle, takes Grange on a grueling barnstorming tour.
Right. To explain a barnstorming tour for those unfamiliar, Halas essentially turned the Bears into a traveling circus.
Instead of a normal weekly schedule, they traveled by train from city to city, playing exhaustive back-to-back exhibition games against any local team that could guarantee a gate receipt.
They played 8 brutal football games in the span of 12 days.
I mean, the physical toll of taking those hits with 1920s medical care must have been agonizing.
No, it had to be torture. But the financial gamble worked.
When Red Grange and the Bears rolled into New York to play the struggling Giants at the Polo Grounds, 73,000 people showed up.
73,000. It was a massive influx of cash that single-handedly legitimized professional football in the nation's biggest media market.
And it literally saved the Giants franchise from bankruptcy.
So Grange brought the crowds and the spotlight, but beneath the surface, the league still had a massive structural and economic problem.
What was the problem?
As the league started to mature in the late 1920s and early 1930s, they began consolidating into major East Coast cities.
They started dropping the smaller original factory towns like Pottsville and Duluth.
Right. And as they moved into these bigger markets, a dangerous financial disparity emerged.
The rich teams in big cities with large stadiums could simply outbid everyone else and buy all the best amateur talent coming out of college.
Exactly. If you were a smaller market team, you had absolutely no mathematical chance of competing.
And that economic imbalance threatened to ruin the core product. Because if the fans know the same two rich teams from New York and Chicago are going to win every single year, the fans in the other cities stop buying tickets.
Right. And the entire league revenue collapses.
This existential threat led to one of the most important counterintuitive innovations in sports history. It was proposed by Philadelphia Eagles owner Bert Bell in 1935 and implemented in 1936, the NFL draft.
And the mechanics of the draft completely revolutionized the competitive balance of the sport.
How did Bell pitch it?
Bert Bell proposed a system where teams select incoming amateur college players in the inverse order of the previous year's standings.
So the team with the worst record gets the very first pick.
And the team that won the championship gets the very last pick.
This is just utterly fascinating to me from an economic perspective.
Why is that?
Well, to ensure the survival of their business, these wealthy NFL owners looked at the landscape and realized that pure, unregulated free market capitalism was going to kill the league.
Yes. The rich would hoard the talent until the poor teams went bankrupt, leaving the rich teams with no one to play.
So they realized they had to implement a completely socialist mechanism, distributing the most valuable labor force strictly based on need rather than capital to keep their capitalist enterprise afloat.
That is precisely what it is. It is institutionalized parity.
I mean, it's brilliant.
Think of it like playing a game of Monopoly, but with a rule twist. At the end of every round, the player with the least amount of money on the board gets the first pick of any unowned property.
That would definitely change the game.
It ensures that the poorest player always has a built-in mechanism to claw their way back in. It ensures that no single market, no matter how wealthy their owner is, can buy a permanent dynasty.
Now, they did experiment with the mechanics over the years, didn't they?
Yeah, from 1947 to 1958, they instituted the bizarre bonus pick era.
Wait, how did the bonus pick work?
During that window, the very first overall pick of the draft wasn't given to the worst team. It was drawn by a random lottery among all of the teams.
A lottery.
Yeah. A team could win the bonus pick, but then they were ineligible for the lottery in future years until every single team had won it once.
That sounds incredibly confusing.
It was a chaotic experiment, and they eventually scrapped it to return to Bert Bell's strict reverse standings order, which is the bedrock of the draft we watched today.
Speaking of monumental shifts in the talent pool, we have to talk about the 1940s, specifically 1946. This is a vital year in the sources because it marks the reintegration of the modern era of professional football.
This is a critical chapter. We discussed early African-American pioneers like Charles Follis in the early 1900s.
Right, and we also have to acknowledge Fritz Pollard, who was an absolute star player in the 1920s and actually became the first black head coach in the NFL in 1921.
But following those early years, from 1933 to 1945, team owners colluded to enact an unwritten, deeply shameful ban on black players in the NFL.
And that racial barrier was firmly in place until it was finally broken again in 1946.
The sources outline the four men who broke it.
Tell us about them.
The Los Angeles Rams signed Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, both former stars at UCLA.
And over in the rival league, the All-America Football Conference, the Cleveland Browns signed Bill Willis and Marion Motley.
These four men reintegrated professional football a full year before Jackie Robinson famously broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball.
It was a crucial, overdue turning point for the integrity of the game. It opened the doors to an entirely new, massive pool of collegiate talent.
And as the sheer athletic talent on the field rapidly improved through the 1950s and 60s, the league began actively looking for new technological ways to showcase it to a broader audience.
Because the true catalyst for the modern NFL's explosive financial dominance was, without a shadow of a doubt, the advent of television.
Absolutely.
The first televised NFL game actually happened way back in 1939. NBC broadcast a game between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Philadelphia Eagles.
But they were only broadcasting to a tiny audience, right?
Yeah, roughly 1,000 television sets in the entire New York area. It was essentially just a technological proof of concept.
It took a visionary commissioner decades later to realize the true, untapped potential of the medium. Enter Pete Rozelle.
Pete Rozelle was a media visionary.
He looked at the mechanics of football and recognized that it was uniquely, perfectly suited for television broadcasting.
How so?
Unlike the continuous flowing action of soccer or hockey, football has built-in pauses between every single play.
Right, the huddle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those pauses allow announcers to build dramatic tension, they allow for isolated replays, and crucially, they allow for commercial breaks without missing the action.
Plus, the rectangular geometry of the field just fit perfectly onto a television screen.
But Rozelle had a very specific, highly ambitious vision. Primetime national football.
He wanted the whole country watching one game at the exact same time.
He experimented with a few Monday night games in the late 1960s, but he hit a massive wall with the networks.
Right. CBS and NBC, the two major broadcast networks at the time, flat out refused to disrupt their regular, highly profitable, primetime entertainment schedules for a weekly sports broadcast.
They couldn't fathom the idea.
Why not?
The conventional wisdom of network executives was that housewives controlled the television dials in the evening. They firmly believed that audiences would simply not watch a gritty sports broadcast on a Monday night instead of a comfortable scripted sitcom or variety show.
But ABC was struggling, right? They were stranded in a distant third place in the national ratings.
Yeah, they needed a splash. So they decided to take a massive, unprecedented gamble on Rozelle's vision.
And on May 26, 1969, ABC signed the historic deal with the NFL, and Monday Night Football was born.
It debuted in the fall of 1970, and it completely changed the cultural landscape of American media.
Because it wasn't just a football game. It was engineered as a massive cultural event.
Exactly. Because it was the only game being played on that day, every single player in the league knew that the entire country, and more importantly, all of their peers across the league, were watching their every move.
Hall of Famers like receiver Lynn Swann and offensive lineman Dan Deerdorf have spoken extensively about how the psychology of Monday Night Football changed how they physically approached the game.
Swann famously noted, "With my family not living in Pittsburgh, I wanted to play my best on Monday night."
It forced players to elevate their performance. It quickly became the flagship broadcast of the entire NFL.
And Monday Night Football blew the financial ceiling of the league wide open.
Suddenly, the television revenue pouring into the league is astronomical.
And with that kind of immense capital at stake, and the entire country sitting in their living rooms watching slow-motion isolated replays on Monday nights, the stakes for the officiating became impossibly high.
The league realized they couldn't afford a blown call by a referee ruining a primetime product that advertisers were paying millions for.
Which leads directly to the introduction of the modern technological safety net, instant replay.
The NFL is heavily reliant on the precision of its officiating today. They have 7 highly trained officials on the field during every play.
But human eyes, operating at full speed while giant men are colliding, can only process so much information.
Right. So in 1985, a man named Art McNally, who headed the NFL's officiating department from 1968 to 1991, led the implementation of the league's very first primitive replay review system.
They rightfully call Art McNally the father of instant replay.
His legacy is literally built into the physical infrastructure of the game today.
When you watch a modern broadcast and the referee jogs over to the sideline monitor, he isn't just looking at an iPad in isolation.
No, he is communicating via headset with dedicated replay officials sitting up in the stadium suite, and he is simultaneously talking to Art McNally, Game Day Central in New York.
Right, Game Day Central is this massive central hub where senior replay decision makers monitor every single game in real time.
They have access to every camera angle, and they help ensure the correct call is made with absolute consistency across the league.
When you contrast that level of technological oversight with the 1920s owners making gentlemen's bets to fold their franchises based on one bad afternoon, it is truly incredible how far the infrastructure has evolved.
It is the ultimate institutionalization of fairness. The league realized that technology like instant replay, combined with the underlying economics of the salary cap, are perfectly engineered mechanisms to maintain the illusion and the reality of parity.
And we still have dynasties, of course.
Right. The 1970 league merger ushered in the modern Super Bowl era, which has certainly seen its share of historical dominances.
You have the Green Bay Packers with their incredible 13 total championships across league history, or the New York Giants with their 19 total championship appearances.
But the underlying system is heavily designed to prevent permanent monopolies and allow bad teams to rebuild quickly.
And the NFL draft proved to be the ultimate weapon for building those modern dynasties.
If you execute Burt Bell's system perfectly, you can turn a franchise around in a few years.
Look at the 1990s Dallas Cowboys. Through a series of trades, they acquired a mountain of draft picks and went from being a 1-in-15 laughingstock in 1989 to winning 3 Super Bowls in the 1990s purely by drafting correctly.
Or you look at the early 2000s, where aggressive teams like the Jets and the Rams leveraged trades to hoard 3 first-round picks in a single draft to completely restock their aging rosters in one night.
And moving into the 2010s, the draft became entirely focused on securing the franchise quarterback.
We saw players like Sam Bradford, Cam Newton, and Andrew Luck all going #1 overall because securing that single position instantly changes a franchise's financial and competitive fortunes.
But if a generational quarterback is that valuable, what stops a billionaire owner in a massive market from simply offering $500 million and buying all 3 of those franchise quarterbacks, putting them on the same roster, and ruining the league's parity?
Ah, the ultimate tool. The final piece of the modern monopoly puzzle is the salary cap.
When the modern salary cap was first introduced in 1994, it forced every team to spend within a strict limit.
That initial cap was set at $34.6 million per team.
A hard salary cap is a fascinating economic mechanism.
Why is a hard cap so different?
Unlike baseball, where a wealthy team can essentially spend as much as their owner is willing to stomach, a hard cap forces every NFL general manager to operate with the exact same pool of resources.
So if you pay your star quarterback a massive percentage of your cap, you mathematically have to field cheaper, unproven players at other positions to stay under the limit.
It forces incredibly difficult roster decisions.
And if you track the explosive growth of that cap number, it is just mind-blowing. It started at $34.6 million in 1994.
Buoyed by television rights and digital streaming, it broke $100 million in 2006.
It hit $200 million in 2022.
And according to the NFL operations data for the 2026 season, the NFL team's salary cap has shattered the historic $300 million barrier.
Officially sitting at $301.2 million per team.
It is an astronomical sum of money.
It is a direct reflection of the immense compounding profitability of the television contracts, the fantasy football ecosystem, and the league's expanding global footprint in Europe and South America.
The mechanics of the salary cap kind of remind me of a massive rubber band holding a bursting suitcase together.
That's a great analogy. The pressure inside the suitcase, the revenues, the player demands, the media rights keeps growing exponentially.
The band started at $34 million. And now it's stretching past $300 million.
But the band never snaps. It perfectly engineers its own scarcity and drama.
It forces all 32 teams to operate on a level financial playing field, which guarantees that the outcomes on any given Sunday remain unpredictable.
And unpredictability is the absolute lifeblood of the sport. Unpredictability is exactly what keeps fan engagement and, by extension, network revenues at an absolute maximum.
If the fans know the outcome before kickoff, the entire economic engine stalls.
It is an incredible journey. I want you to just take a step back and think about the sheer distance traveled here.
Think back to 1892.
You have Pudge Heffelfinger, fresh off a train from Chicago, quietly slipping $500 into his coat pocket to play a single afternoon of football while pretending to be an amateur accountant.
The game they were playing was so mechanically brutal and lethal that a sitting United States president had to summon the coaches to the White House just to keep the players from dying in gang tackles.
The very ball they threw was shaped by exhausted men getting too dizzy to blow it up all the way.
And from those chaotic, muddy, incredibly dangerous origins in Midwestern factory towns and auto showrooms, it systematically evolved.
It survived through the sheer barnstorming grit of guys like George Halas and Red Grange. It actively manufactured fairness through Burt Bell's draft and the modern salary cap.
And it transformed into a towering cultural monolith under the bright primetime lights of Monday Night Football.
And today, you have Art McNally Game Day Central scrutinizing 4K video feeds down to the millisecond, and front offices employing data scientists to manage a $301.2 million payroll.
It is a completely different animal. Yet the DNA of those 14 original towns, the competitive desperation of those railroad workers, is still buried in there.
The scale has changed, but the fundamental pursuit of competitive advantage remains exactly the same.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final fascinating thread from these sources that I want to leave you with.
What's that?
When we were talking about the original 1920 towns and the factory teams, we briefly mentioned the Columbus Panhandles.
Right. They were a team comprised largely of railroad workers from Ohio.
And their massive draw at the gate was the legendary Nesser brothers. There were 6 Nesser brothers who played on the team, and they drew sellout crowds simply because they were massive, bruising men who worked the rail yards all week and punished opponents on the weekend.
The Nessers were arguably the very first famous football family, long before the Mannings or the Watts.
But here's the specific historical detail that completely blew my mind. The records show that in 1921, Ted Nesser, who was operating as a player coach, brought his son, Charlie Nesser, onto the Panhandle's roster.
Wow.
Ted and Charlie Nesser became the only father and son in NFL history to ever play on the same field for the same team at the exact same time. It has never happened since.
1921. That is well over a century ago.
Exactly, over 100 years. But think about the mechanics of the modern league today. We are entering an era with a $301.2 million salary cap.
Right. That kind of unprecedented money provides modern athletes with limitless resources for sports medicine, elite private nutritionists, hyperbaric chambers, and targeted physical therapy.
The result is unparalleled player longevity. We are seeing quarterbacks and elite tackles playing at an MVP level well into their late 30s and even their early 40s. Generational wealth is keeping these athletes in pristine physical condition for decades.
So true.
So here's something to mull over on your own. With the modern NFL machine artificially extending careers longer than anyone in 1921 could have ever dreamed possible, will we soon see a modern superstar play long enough to share an NFL field with his son?
That is a great question.
Will we finally see a repeat of a feat not seen since those Ohio railroad workers battled in the mud over a century ago?
It is a profound question. Given the trajectory of modern sports science and the sheer willpower of today's elite athletes, I would argue it is no longer a question of if, but simply a matter of when.
Something to think about the next time you tune in on a Sunday or a Monday night.
And that brings another quiet episode of Sleepcast to an end. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope our 2 hosts helped you relax, slow your thoughts, and perhaps drift gently off to sleep. New episodes of Sleepcast are released every day, 7 days a week, all year round. Follow Sleepcast on the podcast app you are using now, so new episodes are added automatically, and you can be notified whenever another wonderfully boring story is released. Until next time, sleep peacefully and good night. Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world.